In this video, you're going to be learning all about whale evolution, how whales got to be the way that they are today. Now, before we begin talking about whale evolution, we have to identify what kind of animal really is a whale, and we're going to say that whales are mammals. We're going to assume then that whales did not evolve from fish or reptiles because they share characteristics, important characteristics with mammals. They don't share characteristics with fish or reptiles. For instance, whales don't have scales like fish do or like reptiles do, and they don't have gills like fish do. Also, we're going to talk more about how whales don't swim like a fish. Fish swim side to side. Whales swim in an up and down motion like a mammal would do. Like a mammal when they run and like a mammal when they swim, like if you ever see a dog swimming. So, like land mammals, whales give birth and they nurse their young on milk that are produced in these things called mammary glands. So you see here a beluga whale giving birth. It doesn't lay eggs like a fish would, so we're saying, of course, it's a mammal. Here is an orca, a baby orca, actually nursing milk from its mother. These are characteristics of mammals. Another characteristic that mammals share is that they have hair or fur, some kind of whiskers. And you can kind of see in this image, the little bumps here are hair follicles and there are whiskers. Very, very few and they're very, very short, but whales do have hair. Also, as I said, whales don't have gills like fish would have. In fact, they have lungs and they have these things, we call them blowholes. It's their nostrils. Some whales have two and some whales just have one, but that's how they breathe. They don't have gills like fish would. And like land mammals, whales are what we call warm-blooded, or the other word for that is endothermic. They stay warm through metabolism from the inside. They don't change their temperature with the environment like a fish would or a reptile would. So these are all characteristics that help us to identify a whale as an actual mammal. So we're going to be looking at its relationship to other mammals when we think about its evolution. Now, some of the evidence we have that whales actually once lived on land is that they have pelvic bones and femur bones. So in fact, when we look in modern whales, you'll see remnants of a pelvis and remnants of a femur bone, which is this tiny one here, and as though it had legs at one point in time. You'll also notice that its fin has fingers here. So here you can see it in more detail, just like in a human, in fact. Inside a whale flipper is a humerus bone, which is the name of our upper arm bone, a radius and ulna, the lower arm bones, carpals, wrist bones, and phalanges, finger bones. So within that whale flipper, you actually see fingers. Obviously, the whale's not using the fingers anymore, but the bones are still there. Now let's talk about the most important form of evidence we have of whale evolution, and that is fossil evidence. We see fossilized skulls, teeth, sometimes whole organisms. We can see the shape and everything. Now, what we think is the earliest whale ancestor, the oldest living relative, or not living, but the oldest ancestor of the whale, is an animal known as Cynonyx. It was about 5 feet long, sort of looked like a wolf, lived on land, but lived near coastal waters and probably hunted at least in part in the water. Lived about 53 million years ago. So believe it or not, we think the oldest ancestor that we know of the whale, that shares characteristics with whales, is something that looked something like a wolf. The next transitional form that we find is Pachycetus. And this is an animal, might have looked something like this. It was an amphibious hunter, so it spent a good deal of time hunting in the water, had some traits that helped it swim, such as this tail. You can see it kind of looks like an otter's tail. An elongated snout and its nostrils higher up, so it could breathe better under a situation where it was mostly underwater, so it could breathe just by sticking its nose up a little bit. A little bit larger, 6 feet in length, had very little hair, we think, probably more like a seal, and lived about 50 million years ago. So we're already seeing some changes. The next transitional form we have found that we believe is a relative of the whale is this animal called Ambulocetus. Ambulocetus literally means walking whale. It lived about 48 million years ago, amphibious, so spent a good deal of time in the water, and time on land. We believe it probably had webbed fingers and toes. Larger, you can see it's 9 feet long, no ears, and we believe it probably had a lifestyle similar to a crocodile. So we see this transition from something that looks more like a wolf to something more like a crocodile over the span of less than 10 million years, probably about 8 million years. From there, we see an organism known as RODHOCETUS, lived about 40 million years ago. This animal shows a whale-like spine. So we're starting to see more characteristics of a whale. You can see the nostrils have moved up a little bit on its head. We believe it probably was aquatic and didn't spend much time on land. A powerful swimmer, used its tail as a rudder. You're starting to see the tail is becoming very strong. And it was larger, even still 10 feet long, about RODHOCETUS. Now, these fossils I'm talking about were not all found in this order. They were found in a very different order, but I'm putting them in order of how long ago that animal probably lived on the earth. Now we see a big leap, so there's probably a transitional form we haven't found yet, but this is Dorodon, and it lived about 35 million years ago. It was about 16 feet long, obviously fully aquatic, but you can still see the remnants of some feet here. You see now there's a fluke, the tail has changed, and the nostrils are about halfway up its head. Finally, what we believe to be the most ancient whale, the thing that we would probably call a whale, Basilosaurus, lived about 34 million years ago. Notice 40 feet long. It's very, very large animal. Very small hind limbs, so it did have tiny little legs still, a large head and a large mouth for eating larger prey, and it hunted in shallow water. But so you can see over time the changes that have occurred. So this is what we think happened. Over time, over millions of years, we have this animal, Cynonyx, slowly evolving to Pachycetus, Ambulocetus, RODHOCETUS, Basilosaurus. These are not necessarily animals that evolved into one another, but these are forms that we see in transition from a land animal, which we believe was the ancestor of modern whales, to today's whales. The trends that we see, there's a reduction in the size of the hind limbs, and in modern whales, of course, they're not visible at all on the outside, and the pelvis as well. There are big changes in the ear, and that was a big piece of evidence that we found in the fossil record. In fact, the Cynonyx, wolf-like animal, had an ear that looked a lot like a whale ear, and that was one of the reasons why we believe it's related to ancient whales. The blowhole, we went from nostrils in the front to a blowhole on the top of the head. And finally, the front limbs went from being fingers and arms to being flippers. So those are the trends we see in the evolution of the whale.